welcome to today's session about ESG data. Hope everyone is well rested and energized after Easter. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues Helena and Carsten, and today we will be talking to you about ESG data. We will run through an agenda here, where first we will be talking about what is ESG data and why is it such a hot topic? Why is everyone talking about it? Then we will dive a little further into the foundation. How do you build a good foundation for managing your ESG data? And once we've looked at that, we will continue to look at how can you use AI and machine learning to derive relevant insights, depending on where you sit in an organization. So that's the intent for the session today. If you have any questions, please post them, and I'll make sure to capture them to the extent that I can. Any questions that we aren't able to answer here at the session, we will come back to you in writing afterwards. So, that being said, Helena, what is ESG data? Why is it so important, and why is everyone talking about it?
Yeah, the basic ESG data. It is a very hot topic at the moment. I think what we're seeing with companies today is they actually already have quite a bit of ESG data in their own systems already. It can be in their HR systems, it can be in procurement systems, in financial systems. But really, there's a growing awareness that the environmental and the social and governance data, ESG, that is really where there's new insight to be brought out for the company, and in particular for management to use in their decision making, and for investors to also use in their decision making. And some of the topics that fall under ESG, we're all very familiar with them. I think it can be energy consumption, water consumption, it can be human rights, labor rights. It can also, in terms of governance, we often look at executive remuneration, broader accountability and oversight systems and data for that. And as we can see on the slide here, it comes in many different types and different levels of quality, you could say. Some of it is actually measured from a meter that you might have in your office or in your factory facilities. Some of it is something where we need to calculate it. And then there's, of course, data that we have to estimate because we don't have it today. But really, I think the point is that we already have quite a bit of data, but we haven't actually got our arms around how to use it, how to ensure that it is complete and reliable and sufficient quality to actually really make decisions from it.
Obviously, you've been working with ESG for many, many years. So for you, it's not something new. It's not something snazzy. But really what we can see in society broadly is that this is becoming an increasingly hot topic. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, 20 years ago, companies were pulling in environmental data and some governance data and a bit of people data. But over the past 20 years, and particularly the last 5 years, we've seen a real acceleration in focus on getting this data out and transparency around it, making it available and accessible. And that pull, we've got this convergence now that we haven't had before from all these different actors in the economy and in society. We've got regulators who want companies to be reporting more, to be more transparent. So they're issuing all kinds of directives and regulation for that. We've got investors who also want access to better data from companies. We've got the companies themselves who want to report, who want to tell their story, who want to talk about their purpose and their business in ways they haven't done before either. So over the past 10 years, you could say, a number of initiatives have come about to draw up standards and frameworks and guidelines for how to report this type of data. And at the same time, we've got the data providers, the index providers as well, who are pulling all this data together and presenting it on their platform And they're already doing it by sort of scraping different PDF reports that you might put out as a company, or in other ways, just pulling this data in. So in many ways, we've got a really active market for the data, but we're still not quite sure that it's of sufficient quality and reliability that we can really use it to make the right decisions. And so, yeah, so there's a couple of questions there around, do we have the right data? How do we get hold of this data that we need? Are we able to manage it and use it and work with it in a way that gives us the insights we're looking for? And then, of course, how do we present it? How do we show it to the market? How do we talk about our performance as a company so that we can be rewarded for good performance?
And all of this is driven by, this societal change, focus from investors, focus from companies to really sort of push this whole agenda forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. I think that brings us very smoothly, or maybe not, to the next point, which is looking at how you build a solid and good data foundation to really, leverage your ESG data and draw all those insights. But before we dive a little bit further into that, can you share some insights into what's the status quo, basically? Where are companies today and how are they working with it?
I mean, the status is broad. So some companies are really just starting working with the data, and of course others have done it for 20 years and are quite mature. But I think the sort of the foundation level where many of the companies we work with, where they are, we all recognize it. We work with data in hundreds of different spreadsheets, through emails, PDF documents, Post-it notes. It's just all really quite messy and uncoordinated, unstructured. But that's where many of us will start out in a company. Then as we move towards more advanced work with the data, we might get a piece of software in to help us manage the data. And we might also dive down into some very specific piece of data, for example, on climate risk, climate data. Then we might sort of really take a deep dive and make sure that data is of adequate quality. But then, of course, the goal that we're aiming for, that we're striving for, is where the insights that you can draw from this data is so relevant and meaningful that your executive team, your board, your investors and so on will really be using it and talking about it, just as they will talk about financial performance. They will also be talking about your ESG performance. And I think that's sort of the holy grail for many companies, but that's where we need to move towards in order to really harness the value that's in this data.
And so that's where companies are today.
Yeah.
And how do they then get there if I'm sort of lurking at the foundational level?
Yeah.
How do I then advance?
Well, there's no doubt we need strong governance around the data. And, it's not that different from financial data, where we built strong governance. We built a control environment around financial data that we respect pretty much. And we need to do the same for ESG data so that we build the same respect and the same level of reliability around that data, so that it's on a par, on the same level as financial data. Because then only at that time can we actually start to integrate the analysis and the management analysis of that performance and really get deep insight into the company. And so, I mean, as we can see on the slide there's sort of a very traditional standard setup of governance with different data management systems throughout the organization. You, of course, start with solid accounting principles, guidelines, data protocols within your company where you've agreed on what to measure and report. And that sort of typically comes top down. At the same time, you've got bottom up, the people who sit out in the different entities around the world, perhaps, who are reporting the data into the system. And then you've got data control every time there's a handover of the data, every time it gets aggregated or consolidated till we up at the sort of the top level or the group level, which is the data that you will typically be putting out into the public domain. But one thing that might also complicate things a little bit is that there'll be local requirements, local regulation that starts to also place demands on the data, place demands on the companies for what they need to report. And I think that's something that companies really have to figure out how to manage.
And on that, maybe, you come from, an ESG data background, you come from this data orchestration background, data management background. What would you identify as maybe the main challenges that companies are facing as they try to get their foundation right? So maybe if we start with your perspective, Carsten.
Sure. I think just to add to Helena's point, because it is true, and we saw on the other slide also that you see some regulations in the ESG space coming from UN and different ones coming from other geographical entities. But we're actually seeing the same trends when it comes to technology. So when applying advanced algorithms and machine learning, we're also seeing regulations starting to pop up to say that you can't have, in certain industries, black boxes. You can't have results that are computer generated that we as people can't decode. We don't know where the answer comes from. So there's going to be an overlap here where some of the regional decisions and even at a country level are going to impact. So having that flow move from the bottom upwards is very important to mitigate risk. As far as what are the challenges we're seeing, I think and this is going to be like an ongoing point in some of the talking points that I have, is that while there are a lot of things in the ESG space that are new, which is both due to the time that we're living in, but also due to the nature of ESG, there are also some things that are very, very traditional, stuff that we've seen when integrating other business areas. So trying to not necessarily pivot, but change the outview that our company has. And one of the things that many companies are grappling with in this intersection between technology data and the business is who owns what and who has which responsibility. So the whole DevOps wave, which I believe is a different grab and go session, but this notion of working closer together between the people who are developing technology based on data and the business or users who are taking that into the world and actually making it into action is it requires a different type of governance. It requires a certain understanding of what's the responsibility and ownership for the people on the technology data side, the people on the business side, and sometimes even on your partner side. So aligning and agreeing on how do we split these responsibilities and how do we collaborate to bring out the full value and benefits of data is a challenge that many are grappling with, not just in the ESG space, but across the board.
And is that something you recognize, Helena, that whole roles and responsibilities and who does what? And
absolutely. I think, historically there might be one part of the business that sort of manages and owns the data, but increasingly, because ESG is also such a broad agenda covering both environmental and social and governance topics, it is getting much more spread out into the organization. And that's where, to your point, you really need people to be aligned around the same methods, the same ways of pulling the data together and aggregating, consolidating, reporting it. That means strong coordination. There's no doubt about it. And also regular controls to make sure that nothing gets lost in that data flow that is going to accelerate.
So now we've talked a little bit about, the relevance of ESG data and why it's an important topic. And we've talked a little bit about how to sort the foundation, how to build that foundation that will enable you to draw the relevant insights that you need. So just before, very briefly, that we deep dive into how you can use AI and machine learning and other kinds of technologies for this, let me just see if we have any questions yet. We haven't. Okay, so let's take the next dive then, Carsten, and really explore how you can use AI and machine learning for ESG purposes. So for me, one of the sort of more crisp examples is when you have models that can detect bias and fairness in data, for example, to see, to test out your diversity agenda, for example. How do we remunerate? Do we recruit equally, et cetera, et cetera? So for me, that's sort of, the clear mothership of how AI can be used for good in testing out your ESG data. But obviously there are a ton of applications here and a lot of possibilities. So can you help us press test some of these CEOs, CFO roles and see how would they benefit from leveraging these kind of technologies?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I think we've discussed a bunch of times this whole, how does AI fit into this overall bucket? What's the relevance of new technologies in this space? And I think it boils down again to what you're seeing when a business area becomes so complex and so diverse that you need to be able to handle vast amounts of data. You need different types of systems, or you need your systems to evolve to follow those increases in data. And at some point, while the human brain can do a lot of incredible things, having a human brain along with a spreadsheet just won't cut it when you have sufficient complex data points and overlapping interrelations between those. So that's where AI sort of fits into this whole area. Now, the slide that you showed before was an extract of some of the methodologies that we use when we try to help companies figure out what are all the questions we need to ask, how do we align? And it's important to remember that that is a generic approach that we will be bringing, but where you have the major impacts is when you start with the context of what are we currently doing? Where are we today? What's our technology legacy? What does our current technology data strategy look like? And how does ESG fit into that, not beside that? We want to make sure that we try to integrate it, because a lot of people on this call out in the world are very focused on how do we create the right processes, how do we create the right infrastructure, how do we find the right partners, and all of this is not something that ESG should disrupt or get in the way of. Rather, in a lot of places, it might even help you accelerate those and clear out some of the misunderstandings or challenges that you're having.
So rather than construing this as a compliance exercise, we should really take the opportunity to integrate it as a mean of operational excellence and advancement.
Absolutely. And again, we're talking data today, but that's a whole point where you're also much stronger than I, Helen, at this notion of, we discussed it just before the call actually, where do we want to be in 3 years? Do we want to be compliant? Do we want to be leverage this as a differentiator for our business? Because that vision is going to have a significant impact on which technologies you select, which partners you select, and then how much you invest. But staying true to this notion of something that's conceptual, this is also, it's not specifically a framework that we use, it's more of an archetype to say that this is an example of how you can think about an iterative approach to addressing technology or moving slowly upwards in the spectrum that you showed from foundational to leading within this space. So for me, I've traveled a little bit with trying to find some general purpose examples here that resonate broadly, but hopefully this will get some thoughts started, and obviously there's a lot more specifics behind this. So yeah, we're going to try to give some examples here and try to pick the perspective of specific areas within the business. So, excelling in sort of the foundational level requires some of the same tools that we've seen before. So we're going to try to sort of take the perspective of a CFO in this one, like we're looking at finance accounting. We want to have really solid reporting and be good to bring the information that we have to market. First step is getting that harvested and being as efficient in that process as we can be. Now, over the past many years, we've helped finance and accounting units improve their efficiency by using sort of low-level AI, process automation, RPA, to automate processes, integrated desktop to bring in data to augment processes. We've used process and data mining to create better flows and to get a deeper understanding of what's happening. All those and many, many more still apply to the ESG area. You can create a lot of improvements by using those same tools. Again, you want to leverage the capabilities you have and integrate as much as you can. The next step are some, sort of in the same vein, are some fit-for-purpose technologies for data management that we're seeing pop up. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there. One of the examples that's worth mentioning are the cloud-based platforms that help you get more out of what you already have. So an example is your finance team are going to be scrambling to create either quarterly or yearly reports where ESG data needs to be integrated and be part of what you have. Mm-hmm. So in a thought experiment, let's say we have 5 operational units who are all providing data and information. Today, they're going to be running up and down with Post-its. They're going to be sending emails back and forth, and 10 hours before you need to release and publish this thing, someone has a change in their spreadsheet and need to find whoever's responsible, and she's working from home and not picking up the phone. So all these, we know these examples. So a lot of what you can gain here is that you can collect all that information, all those spreadsheets in one place, and you can create direct links. So in this example, you have the 5 spreadsheets that are linking to one report, possibly many reports. 10 hours before your deadline, you have a change in yours. You make that, you'll be able to see those changes directly in those reports. And sort of the cherry on top is you'll have a full auditable trail of who've made changes at what time to those. So that's a fast way of bringing all your information together in one place and creating visibility of ownership and changes.
And that's what I understand when I talk to you, Helena. That's actually one of the key things that CFOs and also, for that matter, CEOs are requesting. How do I have that ability to track real time? Yeah. For example, looking at carbon offsets, you gave me that example previously. Maybe you can...
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. A lot of ESG data has, quite frankly, has probably only been collected or looked at, just before you publish your sustainability report or your ESG report. And just being able to accelerate the frequency with which you actually collect and check this data and run some controls on it, that is a starting point for companies. So definitely, moving from annual reporting to monthly reporting or even, real time. And that is a challenge. But for example, if you have set let's say you've made a commitment, as many companies do today, around we want to be carbon neutral. Typically today, many companies will only really confirm or check that status of neutrality at the end of the year, and when they can see the consumption data and emissions data, and then they realize, oh, whoops, we're not neutral, and we've done everything we can, but let's buy some carbon offsets to just get us to neutral. That's probably not the way many companies will work with this in the future. They will want to know continuously throughout the year, are we still not just on track, but are we actually still neutral? And if there's an increase in production or something that might throw us off being neutral, well then straight away you can sort of course correct by having visibility into this data. So I think that's certainly something where a lot of companies are starting to get quite excited about.
Yeah, using it. And you have some more examples for us?
Yeah, and I think that's actually a perfect segue to this one, because it's building on sort of the same premise. So moving from an example where you're trying to collect all the data for a general purpose to something where it's more specific. So the entry point that we tried to take to this one is, what if we want to use it for management? So the MI dashboards that are so popular, the management insight dashboards, and in able to get there, it's taking a further step when it comes to automation. As you said, you want to take. So I can't remember if you said this already, but you're the one who talked a lot about this notion of we have some things we can measure specifically, we have some things that we can calculate fairly accurately, and we have some things that we need to estimate. Yeah. Now there's like a counterpointing arrow as far as that maturity curve, right? The more you want to push it more over to that, what can we measure in order to elevate what you have in that maturity curve, and technologies can help to apply to some of that. So you want to get away from the spreadsheets and want to create something that's more robust on your back end, so that you have a stronger architecture or a stronger infrastructure to pull in different sources from all sorts of sources or data from different sources. And that can be your own, or that can be something you harvest from external. So someone else can build as a service solution that you can integrate with your own. So in this particular instance, we were toying around with the idea of, and it's a theoretical idea, but something that we've also discussed with clients, right? What if we want to create a new store somewhere? Well, you can create a dashboard with multiple data sources providing you information on climate, on working conditions, on everything else in that particular location. Meaning, when it comes to ESG, you can get an understanding of how does that impact us if we choose this particular area. And then there are other technologies that help you flip that around. So say if we pick this particular geography, what's our brand there? Like, how are we positioned as far as the ESG metrics that we have? We're working with other companies who collect this type of data. So literally millions of sources of information, anything from the large social media companies to local language, small newspapers with a couple of people with a typewriter, right? All that information goes in. Those types of solutions help you in multiple ways, but putting it sort of bluntly, it can help you baseline. So if you have specific ESG targets on diversity or on labor conditions, you can get a snapshot of how are we performing in this geography. What does it look like today?
So as a CEO, I will be able not only to assess how do I perform in these geographies, but I will also have relevant insights to see should I even enter this geography. So it's basically sort of booming up that commercial assessment with the ESG data that allows for that whole picture of, is it, sound commercially, but is it also the best place for me to be when it looks at, environmental and sustainable governance?
Exactly, yeah. And you can do that as a benchmark exercise. You can do it as a one-off when entering a market, but you can also leverage the same technology on a recurring basis, as you said as well, to have an early alert system if something changes. If an article goes out around the conditions in your specific store, you can address that quickly. So management gets a specific tool that they can use to reduce the turnaround time when something happens in an area that you're focused on. But you can also use it generally for that month by month progression follow-up. Like, how are we progressing on this? Are there more or less articles being pushed? What's the nature of those articles? And that's, again, we talk about machine learning. So this is when talking about artificial intelligence, this is a combination of different types of artificial intelligence that generates very clear tools, very specific values to your business.
And I think that's a great example on how, you really integrate, the commercials. Again, I know I said that before, but for me, it's just such a clear picture of how those two can benefit from each other.
Right.
Because social listening, other tools you would also use for a lot of commercial purposes, right? So it's thinking about how do I use the data tools that I already have and for which purposes, and how can I soundly sort of integrate ESG measurements into those.
Right. And I think it's a point that can't be overstressed, because all too often ESG and the bottom line are seen as counterproductive to each other, and that's just a lot of the examples we will give. You'll see that's actually not the case. You'll find, if you leverage technology to identify how can I improve my performance, or how can I improve on some of the, particularly the social related aspects of the geographies that I operate in, it's going to have a positive impact on your bottom line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let me just see, before we continue, are there any industries which have managed to capture Scope 3 for most of their suppliers, and what has been their formula to get suppliers to provide the accurate data? I know this is something that we have discussed and are discussing quite a lot.
It's a challenge for practically everyone. I don't think anyone has the perfect carbon emissions data set that captures their entire value chain, and certainly not the supply chain either. But I would say, there are industries where parts of the value chain are getting much more robust data. There's examples out there from shipping, also from retail. Some of the industries where they have been tracking, in this case, their environmental footprint for a while, typically your first tier suppliers will be able to supply you some data, but then of course it thins out as you go further down. But I think an interesting point is also how some companies, they might be first tier suppliers, but they're actually in a way commercializing the data that they have or that they're giving you in order to build out your own understanding of your own carbon footprint, for example. So I think back to your commercial point here, this data also, it has value for many different players along the value chain. But yeah, to the question, it's still a challenge. I think we're seeing a mix of some sophisticated data collection and then some that's really still quite manual, and where we're trying to just engage that first tier supply chain, giving them some tools, might still be self-assessment kind of data collection tools, but it's a start. But I also think we will see increasingly companies investing in advising their suppliers on the data, how to develop the data, how to present the data, because it's going to be so critical for them as a buyer, as a company, to be able to measure their own carbon footprint. So I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening there in the next 2 to 3 years even.
And no specific industry that's sort of leader here. This is something that is sort of sitting across different industries with different kind of focus.
Yeah, I would say.
Building on that, as you say, we have this whole ecosystem that we need to look at when we look at data. Carsten, maybe I'm rushing the content that you had on the slide, so please finalize this example. But I know that's something that you will touch on a little later on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So please continue.
Sure, but I think it's that there's obviously deliberate, but also just happened to be a good thread in what we're discussing here, because the next example that we wanted to build, and again, when you get to this point, when you get to when you have fairly automated dashboards that provide status, provides close to real time, at least regularly updated information, you've come a long way. And you're going to see that people are going to start branching when they get to this point. It's going to be different types of technology, different types of value plays that are going to be fit for purpose. And to be very blunt, there aren't that many who've made it that far yet. So we're seeing different things, but we needed to pick something that would be interesting to discuss and that we're seeing gain a lot of traction. So it landed on digital twin technology, which is, it's sort of I guess the epitome of the data management system. Like, this is the data management system on steroids. When you, over the course of many years, have accumulated and perfected data in specific areas, you will be able to build that into a virtual model. So that's what a digital twin is. It's a virtual representation of something physical. So we're seeing interest to build those in a lot of areas. For housing, we've done one for Formula One cars, for supply chains, and for production units. So sort of the imaginary scenario that we were toying around with earlier was, if I'm the COO, if I'm responsible for the, I don't know why I picked this role for myself, but if I'm responsible for the production in a unit, and I have built digital virtual representations of my entire supply chain in an area, as well as my entire production facility, then I'm able to not only monitor how things are performing in as close to real time as possible, but I'm also able to run very advanced simulations. So the idea we were playing around with is, if you're producing a unit and you want to replace steel as a high emission component with something made out of wood, you would be able, if the data was sound enough, to run simulations on production speeds, on time to market, on delivery cycles, quality. All those things you'd be able to run multiple simulations on before you move on to real life prototyping, which again, be very clear that the manufacturing and sort of a lot of the methodologies that we use today, like rapid prototyping, aren't going anywhere, but you have the ability to have a more robust standpoint when you move into those phases. You can do more theoretic testing and get an understanding of what is it we're moving into when you can build those. And the interesting thing also is it doesn't have to be sort of a clear-cut thing. You have to have all the data before you can get moving on this. You can start small, testing it out, and done properly, you'll have an overview that tells you, okay, what is the probability that the simulation that I've just run is correct? And that might, in a heat map, that might be red, and you'll say, why is that? And you'll drill down and say, well, that's because of this particular data set. That's not real time. It's something that was latest updated by this person 2 years ago. So that's very much an estimate from my side. They're a digital twin, and you'll have other areas where you have sensors running that are providing that information in real time, and you can make some very accurate estimations.
So that really emphasizes that you need to get your foundation sorted, because otherwise, whether it be any kind of simulation that you run in digital twin, AI machine learning, if the data garbage in, garbage out, if the data isn't correct and it's not updated, then your predictions are going to be crappy.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah.
And I think the whole digital twin area is so relevant for ESG and for this area, for climate in particular, because we don't have the answers yet, as both of you say, and we really need to do different kinds of simulations and scenario testing to figure out how's this going to look like. And once we lean into sort of incorporating that in the commercial strategies, as we talked about earlier, that's when it really becomes a commercial play.
Exactly. Yeah, so the final point that I have, I won't say it's more abstract, because it's not, but it's less techy in its essence. It's very much around how we collaborate and how we continue to improve on what we have. So we drew this initially as a cycle, right? So once you have all your foundational data in place, you can start over, because there's a new type of data, there are new tools in place. So continuing that loop makes sense. And for you to start sort of the second round of that loop requires you to collaborate. So you have a certain level of experience, you have certain resources, you have a certain technical depth in your company, and that'll take you so far, but you will reach a point where you need to collaborate with others. Especially because the point that I made earlier is that so the revolution that we saw with financial data, getting to a point where you had fully automated or augmented dashboards, and you have a lot of processes that were manual that you can now run like at your fingertips. That was sort of a linear process with the technologies available. There are so many branches, there are so many directions that you can go into, that the experience that companies and industries gain at this point are not synchronous. They're asynchronous.
Asynchronic, yeah.
It's a difficult word, but they're gaining information and knowledge at different speeds and different levels. So to accelerate that, they really do need to work together. And we're seeing a lot who are working with startups, who are working with the universities, but we're also seeing people start to engage with their competitors. Yeah. So you had what do you call?
Well, I think that with this pre-competitive collaboration is something we're seeing in a number of consumer industries in particular, and it's simply that recognition that we can't as one company handle this whole revolution. We need to partner up, and we're willing to share all the data we have in the spirit of non-competition or pre-competition, and then once we've agreed on what it can do, we've figured that out, then we can go off and be competitors again. But I think it's a really encouraging development that we're seeing.
Definitely. And that's what I really like about, this forces us in some extent to really come together, because, the changes are societal. There are so many dependencies, and there are so many actors that really do need to come together in order to drive this forward. And data from everyone here is just going to be such a valuable player. Yeah.
And again, just because we are who we are, we have to say that obviously technology can help accelerate this agenda. And one of the things, also a topic that's been discussed a lot over the last few years, is this notion of building sort of a platform approach to how you collaborate. So the example that we gave, because we're seeing a lot of these, but we can't unfortunately talk too much about all of them, but the example from Harvard Education is public domain. And it tells a good story that there is a central sustainability unit within Harvard that have for years accumulated data sets, built different types of dashboards, used that for various types of both education as well as information purposes. And rather than continue to do that point to point, they decided to create this hub where they say, here it is. This is all the data that we found. These are all the overviews and dashboards that we've created. Feel free to add, feel free to, well, not subtract, but feel free to add to it and work with this directly here. And we're seeing a lot of those. They're again, sort of public spaces where you can generate ideas, where you can network, where you can meet other companies and where you can sign up for different types of initiatives, as well as the closed loop ones where you're still willing to share something that you prior would think was pretty sensitive. But in the order of accelerating this agenda with that in mind, they're willing to build those platforms where you can throw in your technology, your data, your experience, and collaborate there.
But so if I was a CEO today, I would have a little sort of FOMO, I think, knowing that, fear of missing out on all of these technologies and how they could potentially support the journey that I'm going to embark on. So, and please share your perspectives, both of you. Let's play for a second that I'm a CEO and I come to you guys and ask, okay, I really want to have, good insights into my company's performance. I wanted to be able to report. I want to be able to figure out where to develop, where to play commercially, but I don't know how to get started. How would we then help the poor CEO to figure out how to get started on this journey?
Do you want to?
Well, I mean, I'd just say, start with the baseline. Start with the data you already have. There's very likely to be something really good that you can draw out of that just hasn't been gotten to yet. And then I think from there, it's understanding the risks and the opportunities around the data, as we've also talked about before. Just what is it I need to then manage, agree on these internal governance structures and rules and processes and responsibilities. Again, there's already something to learn from the existing setup. It doesn't necessarily mean it's one-to-one carryover, because you need other subject matter expertise in as well. But it's not. There's very few companies who are starting from scratch here. So I just say don't panic. Just start with what you have, and then build out the rule book or the playbook for your data. And as you move on, be a little daring, to start working with scenarios and forecasting. It doesn't even have to be quantitative either. So you can start with qualitative scenario analysis and just start to understand the that depth and breadth that the data can give you in terms of an insight. And then just to accept this is an iteration. You're going to go over and over things again and again in order to build that near perfect data set.
Yeah, and that's actually also the point that we had in this. I'll just expand a little bit on yours, because I think that's the right thing to and we'll get to that in the key takeaway in a few seconds, right? That you need to start small and expand from there. But also to your point, don't think of it detached. Don't think, because I think historically on CSR, that's what you did, right? Let's do something that has a PR effect. And say, look how cool we are. We're doing something great for the local sports companies or whatever. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it doesn't necessarily tie in with what your corporate strategy is and where you're heading. So if you are a company that already has an IoT strategy, we want to be leading within sensors. When you have something fundamental that can elevate and accelerate your ESG agenda as well, that might even also be something that you could offer to your customer's customer. So where do you want to play in this court? Do you want to be compliant in 3 years, or do you want to change the business that you have? Is technology something that can enable you to drive your business in a different direction as well? And
that's the good thing about all the learnings we have from the CSR area and how that has grown too. So conscious of time, I haven't been, I can see, but I will be now. Maybe just summing up, we've touched a little bit on, ESG data, the foundation, and how you can derive the relevant insights depending on what kind of person and individual you are in a company. We have some key takeaways, and I think basically we have touched on them already during it. But this is your sort of final moment to shine, the two of you. What should our audiences take away as key points from this discussion today?
Well, I can start with the first one. As we mentioned earlier, I think it's just to start looking at your data as having much greater potential to inform you, then you've looked at it before because you treated it perhaps very sort of, it's historical, it's backward looking, it's things that have happened. But increasingly, investors and many different stakeholders internally as well, they want to know, okay, so what do we do now? We know what happened last year, we know where we are, but now what are we going to do in order to, improve or move our performance in a specific direction? So I think that requires a bit of a mind shift in mindset. I think for many people that they haven't looked at the opportunities that there are in ESG data, and you don't want to miss that opportunity because you're probably going to lose out from a competitive perspective as well, possibly also reputational. This is a great opportunity, and there's nothing to sort of be too afraid of.
Lean in. Carsten?
Yeah, and I think it goes well in hand, obviously, with our key takeaways, right? That don't start by thinking you need to reinvent something. Take a look at this and look at where you're already projecting to be, and then see how you integrate and elevate what you're already doing by putting ESG in that same bucket. And the other one is apply what the thinking that you probably already have around digital advancements. So trying something out in the small, something that's ideally low complexity, high value for your business, aligned with your strategic goals. Where can we do a pilot when it comes to ESG? Where can we test something, try something, become stronger, but never lose sight of some sort of an ambition. Don't do a 10-year vision, do a 3 or 5 year vision, and be ready to change it at some point if context or learnings change, right? But having that mark out there and always trying to define what that journey looks like what would it take for us to get here, and see is this a step that puts us in that direction, and then have the agility to try it out and move in a different direction and collaborate to achieve those goals.
And then very low practically, digital people on the call, hang out with the sustainability people in your company and vice versa, because there's so much potential in you guys joining forces and seeing how you together can drive this agenda forward. This was what we had today to share with you. Hope you got some insights that you didn't have before. Any questions, please reach out. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for your time.